Okay, yeah, as Steve says, I'm Dan McQuillan. I'm a web manager for Amnesty. I'm not here to give the Amnesty official view on social media innovation. I'm not sure there is one. But I can talk about the architecture of participation and how it's used for campaigning. So I can talk about the use of that by Amnesty, by Greenpeace, by Witness. But more interestingly, I'd like to talk about the disruptive stuff, new innovations that are coming out of nowhere, not traditional organisations. And I mean things like Move On, Avars, I don't know if you saw the launch of that recently, and completely grassroots networks like the Genocide Intervention Network. And I'd also like to talk about the fact that one of the greatest things for me about social media is that people are just going to do it anyway. They aren't waiting for the organisations to catch up with them, thank goodness, and they're just getting on doing it. So I'd like to talk to you about, for example, human rights and YouTube. It may seem like an unlikely combination, but there are some police currently awaiting trial in Egypt, the first ever prosecutions for torture by Egyptian police, largely a result of exposure of videos on YouTube. And I can talk to you about the ice cream flash mobs of Belarus. But while talking about those things, what I'd also like to say is, in my opinion, as someone who's a human rights practitioner, there's every chance that this social media stuff is going to lead to exactly the opposite of what we're here for today. It's not going to lead to innovative collaboration, it's going to lead to conformity, possibly. And the reason I say that is because of the privacy invasion that's kind of built in. There's a reason why Google paid all that money for YouTube. There's a reason why Yahoo's gobbled up Flickr and Delicious. Obviously, they want to know everything about us, and they want to know everything about our relationships. And that's a lot of exposure. And I have a feeling that when people wake up to that kind of exposure, they're going to be very wary. And I think they're right to be wary, because we know that the Pentagon have explicitly targeted social networks for analysis. And we also know that when social media threatens to make a social difference, then you can get another kind of backlash. Because unfortunately, using Egypt as an example, I don't know if you've seen in the news the last few days, there's a guy called a blogger called Karim Ammar, who's just been sentenced to 4 years, simply for expressing some views online, which he had every right to do under international law. So, there are unfortunately some other threats as well, in my opinion, to this innovation stuff. I'm being sort of like, be scared, but don't worry, it's not all bad. But be scared, seriously. Because it is bad. I was at a thing called the Internet Governance Forum in Athens a few months ago, and I can tell you there's a titanic battle, in case you hadn't realised it right now, between two global legal frameworks. One is intellectual property rights, the aggressive assertion of intellectual property rights by monopolies, and freedom of expression. And that's a battle that's going to have a big consequence, in my opinion, for the kind of innovation that we get to do with our social media networks. And personally, I'm with a guy called Joichi Ito, who during one of the sessions there, he said something like, the freedom to remix, is another form of freedom of expression. So, but anyway, what does that mean for? I'm trying to speak to the topic. This topic today was something like, how do we optimise social media innovation, or something like that. In my opinion, we have to, because I really believe that this stuff is the best chance we've got for human rights activism in the 21st century. So it's really important. But it's not just the fact that human rights needs social media, it's the fact that social media, in my opinion, needs human rights. If we're going to keep that quality that a guy called Jonathan Citrain, I don't know if you know about him, but he calls it generativity, the capacity to be creative, to innovate, to collaborate, all that stuff. How are we going to keep it? I'd suggest to you that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has got a part to play in that. Not some stuffy old thing on a shelf, but embedded in what we do. So it's got to be in the policy and regulation. Creative Commons is good, but it's not enough. It's got to be in the code. And tools like Siphon, which is actually developed to be spread by social networks. And I think, obviously, which would be probably the biggest part of this conversation, it's got to be in the culture of what we do. Because I'd like to see a place where we can say to people, here's a safe space for collaborative innovation. So that campaigning organisations don't have to go, this is the campaign, just do it. They can step back and say, this is the campaigning context. Here's a safe space for collaborative innovation. Now, you become part of the change that you want to see. So if anyone else wants to be part of that conversation, I'd be very happy.